Hard sometimes to gauge your community, especially if this is the first time you're really doing outreach into your community. So one of the biggest things we tell people is the most important thing above all is not to guess what your community needs, but to ask. So really getting entrenched in what your community is doing and understanding what they need, especially schools. Thanks for coming, Jeff. And really asking them, engaging what they need from you instead of providing a service or an event or an idea that they don't really need and thus they don't grab onto it. When you're actually writing this is getting more into specifics about writing a proposal, the best thing that you can do is include data. So data speaks above all things. It's one thing to say, New Mexico has a diverse population and use that to build on your proposal, but it's another thing to say this is the breakdown of the New Mexico demographic data, and this is how it breaks down in my community, and this is how we will be serving X portion of that population. So being specific not only allows the reviewers to have confidence in your proposal, it lets them know that you've done research, that you have taken the time to include specific information. And then also, when you're citing those sources, make sure that they are not only credible, but accessible. So if somebody is going back through and goes, is that really true that is the demographic breakdown of that city? They can go back in and easily find something and verify the data that you're including, so they are verifying what you're saying, and it makes you look really smart. Everyone likes to look smart. Another thing that I want to briefly mention is, although our organization doesn't specifically talk about including letters of support or letters of commitment in your proposals, a lot of funders outside of our organization do look for that. If you're really entrenched in your community and you have a true community connection, that is best supported by a letter of commitment over a letter of support for several reasons. A letter of support is really easy to get. It's really easy to go up to an organization and say, hey, this is my idea and this is my event and I really believe in it and I love my event and I love kids and I love to help them out and teach them barbershop. And anybody can say, oh yeah, that's a great event. I totally support that, and you ask them for a letter of support and there you have one. A letter of commitment really requires you to not only compromise with another organization, it shows true collaboration between your two organizations, because it allows the funder and the reviewers to know that you have gotten so far and talked to them so much that they are willing to support your organization with resources, human capital, even actual capital if they're also donating to your event. So if you're getting another grant, and including that in your proposal, a lot of times you can get them to write a letter of commitment that just says we are committing X amount of funds to your event, and it shows that you are essentially verifying what you're including in your budget or your proposal, and shows that you have a true level of commitment from people outside of your organization in your own community when you're looking for other funds from outside of your community.
Probably one of the most significant parts of a project is, what is your goal? And how does it actually get defined into objectives and the final outcome when you're reporting back to us? So, what are goals? So think of them in this direct definition here. We have goals are overarching outcomes that describe what your project is attempting to accomplish. So we're talking about, in essence, these are like really defining the scope of the challenge that you're trying to tackle. And they're not going to be, they're going to be somewhat specific, but we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of how we're going to do it and what the outcome it's going to achieve. We're actually just looking at what is the concept that we want to kind of shoot for. So for instance, we want to expose young men to barbershop. I used all youth event examples because I think most everybody here uses a youth event. Let's say you also want to start including music educators, local music educators, because you've been doing this for a couple of years, but you want to make a couple extra connections, and there's a new high school being built, so you want to do that. So maybe that's a goal that you want to achieve there. maybe for the first time you've been doing this for 10 years and you're like, wow, we haven't touched one part of our community that's underserved. Maybe that's economic underserved, or maybe it's a ethnicity underserved situation. So, and you want to actually tackle that and bring more diversity to your participants. So these are conceptual goals in that sense. But when we move on to like, okay, well, what are our objectives then? Because it kind of sounds like the same thing to some degree. So these are the actual measurable steps that you're going to do to achieve those goals. And what does that exactly mean? Well, I have some examples for you. So at this point, you're like, well, you know what? If we want to expose young men to barbershop, that means we have to invite them to actually be a part of barbershop. So we need to figure out ways to market to them. We need to figure out ways to get into their schools, right? So this is one way of like kind of the lineage between creating a goal and moving to the objective of how you're going to do it. Maybe you need to invite the new school music educator, the new choral music educator that just started. Maybe we need to be more proactive in inviting family members and friends. Maybe we need to get the kids to be more encouraged to inviting more of their friends to be part of it. And then, one of our pillars is encouraging lifelong singing. So, maybe we need to set up some type of membership opportunity or other opportunities for them to participate outside of this event afterward. So there's all kinds of different ways that we can engage them to achieve those goals. So I do goals plus objectives equals outcomes. Now, when we ask for that in the application, we're actually kind of asking you to anticipate what the outcomes are going to be. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's right or wrong whether you achieve those outcomes. It's more of just like it gives your goals a focus. So when we say that, we want them to be quantitative, we also want them to be qualitative. So it could be in these examples here. 25% of your participants want to come from underserved communities. We could say, you know what, we're going to get 10 local high school music educators to come. We're going to make that as a part of our outcome. Maybe we want to increase our attendees. Maybe we want to increase our participation. Also, maybe we want to have like 10% of them come from an underserved community. So there are all different kinds of ways that it basically gives you a baseline to start researching what the history of your project will entail. So in other words, it allows you to compare each year to see how you're growing and changing and if you're reaching your goals, and maybe you need to try different steps. So outcomes is a really key part of achieving the goals, and also helps you judge your goals as well. These are some situations that we've come across. Budgets can come in a variety of forms. We do have a budget sample online, but sometimes there are different situations where you have different things in each one of your programs. But it's important to include in your expenses just everything that you're going to be going through. For instance, you've got to have a venue, so there's a venue cost, right? You want to make sure that's included in there. But say somebody's like, oh, you know what, a school's going to donate their venue. So maybe that's a line item that you put in there, and then you also put it in your revenue to kind of balance it out to show that, hey, this is an in-kind expense. So those kinds of things. Things that you shouldn't put inside as an expense, though, is something like equipment purchases or salaries, administrative salaries, large amounts of miscellaneous expenses that have no definition whatsoever.
So when you read the proposal all the way through and then you look at the budget and see a really large line item that was never correlated to in the actual application narrative, it's hard to understand that expense.
Right. And then also when you're creating a proposal, you want to make sure that it's detailed, but it's also concise. So we want to keep it so that the reviewer can really clearly understand it without having to really read into it or look over, if they have a bunch of several items that have nothing to do with the application that wasn't even requested, then it can kind of be confusing then as well. important to include any in-kind donations, because sometimes there are things like you're going to have this 3-day camp, but somebody has donated food all 3 days. Well, these kids have got to eat, and so we want to make sure that at least that's taken care of. So those kinds of in-kind expenses are great to also note, because it also shows like another form of community connection. And I'd also say that, like, ticket sales and let's say you charge something for your camp and you're charging $25 per kid to come. It's very important to outline that, say, okay, so earlier in the application we said we're going to have 75 kids attend, so it's going to be 75 times 25. So you just need to note that and just show the math there, to just make sure it's easy for the reviewer to go, okay, that makes sense. And always double check your work on that too.
And that being said, just a couple of things to remember: check your work, because even Excel can make a mistake. And it's not really Excel making a mistake, but sometimes you type the wrong thing in a cell and it miscalculates, and then a reviewer or a funder looks at that and they say, wow, they didn't even go back to add their math. Like, right. Are we going to trust them with all this money we're about to give them? Maybe not. But just always going back to check your work and make sure everything works out even to the last decimal point. Another big thing is to make sure you show a deficit. So if you're applying for a grant, it's to fill a hole in your budget, right? So if your budget doesn't show a need, why would a reviewer or a funder fund you? And then just describing any nondescript items. So those miscellaneous expenses, and there always are some, right? And every chapter has something that might not fit right into the budget, or it's hard to explain what that is. A budget narrative is really where you can take the time to write out those little things that a funder might have questions about, because Ashley and I normally, if we really have questions about a budget, we're going to reach out to you and be like, hey, why did you include this in your budget? Or I don't understand how this incorporates into your budget. But a lot of other funders outside of us, because we care about you guys, you're barbershoppers, we love you. But a lot of other organizations get inundated with so many applications that they don't have the time to reach out and clarify those questions. So it's important to make sure that you include them as a bottom portion of your budget, or you can include them as an additional attachment if you really need to, but it's important to explain them at some point somewhere in the application or otherwise. Really, the unforeseen things are going to be included in post-project reports. So after your project, almost any funder is going to ask you to submit some kind of report or essay or letter to let them know how your project went, what the results were. A lot of times they'll ask you to submit kind of progress reports, kind of a thing, and let them know where you're having problem areas, and sometimes they'll be able to help you in finding how to fix that. Or, but a lot of times those unforeseen expenses are really included in the project reports unless you create a padding room in your actual budget for any unforeseen expense. But you should always use the full amount of funds or return it. So if you don't, you should never pocket any money that you don't use in a project. That's just best granting practices. So some baseline skills for grant applications in general. The golden rule of applications is to follow the guidelines, follow the directions. Read the directions, read them thoroughly, even if they're long, tedious, and boring, because sometimes you'll be reading over them and you'll notice something last minute that you were going to include in your application, and you're like, I'm super happy I didn't do that. It's also really important as you're going throughout your application to make sure that you're attaching the right documents. You're submitting your project reports on time. You're not leaving anything out of your project reports that are asked for. Just general things that, even though it may seem silly to include something like follow the directions, it really is super, super important, because although sometimes we have the ability to say, hey, like, you forgot to attach this, or you attached the wrong document, other funders will literally disregard your entire application because you didn't fill out the right number in the right section. So, or if you didn't write your name on the application, kind of thing, so it's always important to remember to follow the directions. Grammar is definitely key. Use complete and thoughtful sentences. A lot of times, especially in the longer application processes, it's easy to get to the bottom of something and be tired and feel like you've said something a million times, but it's important to say it the way you want to be heard. And being concise is really important because reviewers are normally reading anywhere between 10 and 15 applications. For us, it's a little bit less than that, but a lot of times for other funding opportunities, they're inundated with applications, so they're reading tons and tons and tons, and even little things make them feel like you didn't care to take the time to write something eloquent and informative. Kind of taking out some of those redundancies throughout your application makes it more concise, easier to read, and more informative. Because it's easy for a reviewer that has read 5 applications and 5 people said all of the same things, and you're saying it 5 more times, they get lost in that, and maybe they forget what the actual point and scope of your application was. So just being concise, and it's almost a courtesy to the person taking the time to read your application too. All right, so another thing to remember, even though especially as, we're barbershoppers, we love acronyms. We love them. We have acronyms for everything. I mean, you guys know what KIB, right? You know what a KIB is, right? I'm telling you to keep it basic and keep it barbershop. So if you do need to use an acronym, just remember to always explain what that acronym is beforehand. And I would honestly recommend, if you use an acronym a lot in your application, specifically if it's a long application, to repeat the full explanation of the acronym more than once, because as you're reading through an application as a reviewer, sometimes you get halfway through it and you've forgotten what that means, and you have to flip back 3 pages to remember what that acronym meant, and then you're lost in thought, and you kind of get lost in the whole application. Now, you don't have to be redundant. If it's the same paragraph, you don't have to say, keep it barbershop, keep it barbershop, keep it barbershop in 3 consecutive sentences. But it would be nice if you wrote, keep it barbershop, parentheses, KIB, and then throughout that paragraph you can say KIB, but if you're in another part of the application, re-explain it one time, and then you can use the acronym again. Also, just as a baseline, you should use positive language. Positive language is going to be much more effective in getting the reviewer to feel a certain way about your application. There's easy ways to do it. It's just changing the way you look at things sometimes. Like, instead of saying something is inexpensive, you could say something is cost effective. It's just a minor subconscious thing. It just makes people, when they're reading your application, maybe feel more positively toward your actual structure and how they perceive your application, even if it is subconscious. And then lastly, be decisive but eloquent. Don't say, if we were to receive funding, I would say using the funds we were to receive. So it's still a subconscious thing that maybe we don't think about, but being decisive means confidence. But you can do it in a way that's also eloquent. Just be consistent. Make sure that your numbers match across the board. Make sure that you are not losing yourself in your application. I mean, every application, it doesn't need to be robotic, but it is important to say what you mean, and then don't lose yourself at the end because you're tired. If you really need to, you shouldn't be writing your application on the last day before submitting it anyway. Take a break, save your application, come back, reread through it, and make sure that you're really saying what you want to say and saying it how you want to say it, and it comes across well. And the more eyes on your application, the better. Have somebody that is familiar with your event read it, so that way they can give you any feedback about the event that maybe you missed something that was important to your event. Have somebody that is completely unfamiliar with your event read it. So, if your wife has no idea what you even do in barbershop, be like, hey honey, could you help me out and just read this tonight? And she would be, or they would be, extremely helpful in just letting you know how it reads to somebody that would be unfamiliar with it, because even our reviewers, some of them aren't directly barbershoppers. They're people in music, but sometimes they don't know everything about barbershop, so it's important to have somebody who is unfamiliar with it read it as well. And then lastly, have somebody that really loves to tell you you're wrong read your application. For me, it's my brother. He is a journalist, and he loves his red pen more than anything, and he will copy edit anything that I give him. So I know we all know that one person that loves to draw those red circles and mark out sentences and read your application too, because it's easy when you're writing something to miss a comma or comma splice, and we're not going to catch it, but somebody fresh to your application might catch it and think it's careless.
It's also really important to, you're looking through these questions and, sometimes it's just hard to really understand what they're asking.
Mm-hmm.
So, for us, give us a call, for our application, or, if you're the other organization that you apply for, contact them and just, ask them, what are you really asking here? We want to make sure that we're clear. So that's very important to keep that line of communication going. I would try to write more in paragraph form, or if you do feel like you have to list something out, just go ahead and just,
Preface it.
yeah, exactly. And just make your list out, put a space between there, something that just delineates it. It really isn't, when we go back through and read applications, when somebody takes the time to actually space it out and, just put it in those forms, it's not really difficult to read. So the bullet points, while they may be helpful in some instances, we just kind of work around it a little bit. You really need to write out the narrative for the goals and the objectives and the outcomes for that matter. But if you do want to add in charts, I know we have like an option to add extra data to your application if you'd like to. So you're welcome to attach those as well if you feel it significantly supports your application. You can email us at outreach@barbershop.org. So that's where, you can reach her and I, or Joe, or anybody in the outreach department if you have any questions. So it's a really quick way to do that.